These are the kinds of people. These are the kinds of people we have to. Just can't get them like they used to. I know. So, sollen wir anfangen? That's the last German I'm going to speak this evening. Sollen wir anfangen? Yeah. Huh? Bitte nicht. So, okay. So, a very good evening. I feel like I've got my back to you, but I'm also just about to fall off this thing. Anyway, now I've got my back to you. It doesn't work. Okay, anyway, we'll work it out. Very good evening. Thank you all very much for coming. Despite this extremely professional setup, we're going to have a very informal conversation. One of the things that Phileas does all year round is to invite interesting, engaged curators from museums, Kunsthalles, biennials, all around the world to come to Vienna, get into studios, visit the institutions, see what's going on here, maybe find something that interests them, that sparks an idea that they take back with them, that maybe never develops into something or maybe develops into something very concrete very quickly. It's, I would say, one of the best things we do, one of the most fun things we do. And once a year, this culminates actually in a group trip where we invite a whole group of international museum curators to come at the same time. And we are on the final night of a 3.5-day, I realize it's quite brutal to ask you to do this on the final evening. It's like a Japanese endurance game show, a Viennese endurance game show. And we've just spent, since Saturday evening, we've been in artist studios, we've been in artist foundations, we've been meeting artists, we've done galleries. Many of the people we've met are here this evening as well. And we've eaten. Salvatore took care of that. The problem of asking a Sicilian to organize a trip means that food plays an outsized role. But it was fabulous. And we, meaning Vienna, has basically been downloading its finest on these lovely people, together with 6 other curators, one of whom's here this evening, Kathleen Chaffee from the Albright Knox in Buffalo. And we thought that it would be nice if this evening we step backwards a little bit and they step forwards and tell all of us a little bit more about them and what they do and who they are. So maybe we'll start with me stopping talking and you can introduce yourselves. Michelle.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me, Jasper, and everyone at Phileas, and it's so nice to meet everyone. I'm Michelle Miller-Fisher. I'm originally from Scotland. I've lived in the US now for about 15 years. I came first to work as an educator at the Guggenheim Museum, where I was for about 4 years. And then I worked for Independent Curators International, the Metropolitan Museum, MoMA, where I was in the Design and Architecture department for a long time, then the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and now I'm at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where I live in the Contemporary department, and I look after design, decorative art, and craft, although I really work with a range of artists and makers across media, but living artists. So it's nice to meet everyone.
Hello, and my name is Natalia Sielewicz. Thank you so much, Phileas, and everyone for having me. It's been tremendous. I work at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, which was founded, despite its name, in 2003. So we are a very young modern art museum, actually focusing more on contemporary art and post-war art in general. We were founded specifically to start a collection from scratch, which at first focused on Central European art of the region, and then expanded with slightly more international dialogue with the art from Global South and other parts of the world. I work predominantly with the medium of performance and painting. A lot of my program focused on biopolitical issues and feminist agenda, which has become ever more pertinent in the light of the recent cultural wars in Poland that are not specific to Poland, but as you may know, with the reproductive rights protests that were happening in our country, this has become truly Problematic. I'm thrilled to be here. It's not my first time in Vienna. I actually first time I visited Vienna was with my parents to Prater a long time ago, but ever since, yes, I've been visiting this lovely city and meeting artists, gallerists, institutions, but it's so nice to be here to get access to these incredible places with you and meet this lovely cohort of people. Thanks.
The reason I actually asked them to introduce themselves is so I didn't have to pronounce Natalia's name.
Yes.
So there's a hidden agenda here. Franziska.
So I'm Franziska Nori, and I'm directing since 7 years now the Frankfurter Kunstverein, which is an institution that doesn't have a collection, unlike yours. And so therefore we are mainly focusing on contemporary and very recent art. Currently we're showing an exhibition that we just opened the night before I came here, which was the reason why I was pretty out of it for the first day, I think, and with the title Intelligence of Plants. So what we do since 7 years, but long before that, that was my focus, is to always question our historic moment through the eyes of very recent art, but also through the investigations and the knowing and the findings of contemporary natural science. So basically I would say we concentrate on 3 columns of thematic areas. One of it is definitely the changing relation in between us as a human species and the other living beings, and therefore in the era of Anthropocene. Another stream is more the impact of digital technologies on our society. Trevor Paglen has been one of our shows. And the third one is to devote our institution as a community-rooted institution to present new emerging talents that work and study in a region. Frankfurt is one of the cities that has a very high density of academias, Städelschule and Hochschule für Gestaltung, and therefore our institution has in its DNA to present, to be an institutional space, to also help them to develop an institutional presentation and experience. Prior to that, I've been 7 years the founding director of the contemporary art space in Palazzo Strozzi in Florence. Maybe also because I'm born and raised in Rome, but I'm half German, so this is the areas where, yeah, I work more at ease. And I come very regularly to Vienna, and I include regularly also Austrian artists in our shows. Currently we opened with Thomas Feuerstein again, which was also one of the first exhibitions that I made when I first started in Frankfurter Kunstverein. But thanks for having me here, because it allowed a new perspective also on more classical positions and on issues that I wasn't even aware of.
Fantastic. So just before we leave Vienna behind for a moment, we were thinking that it could be nice just to have some rapid-fire instinctive responses to what we've been looking at the last days. You mentioned that you've been here, you come here quite regularly. How have you seen Vienna change over the last years? Have you seen Vienna change over the last years that you've been coming here? What were your takeaways from what we've been doing over the last few days?
Vienna has always been, so to say, the counterpole, at least from my perspective, a bit to Berlin. Berlin was always the city where we expected young emerging artists to be able to find a landscape in which to develop something out of the merely market-driven and economically pressuring assumptions. And I think Berlin is losing a lot of that recently due to many things. But Vienna is not anymore just a promise of taking on that sort of mission, but is already there. And the density of not only institutions, but also of artists working here, having their atelier here, and also of the many independent spaces, presentation spaces, is a quality that we appreciate a lot. And I'm talking also for other colleagues that tend to come here quite frequently.
I could only mirror what you just said about Berlin, Vienna dynamic. I also feel like there is great ferment, artistic ferment happening in the city. And of course, coming from Poland, we have, as a country, long-standing relationship with Austria and with the region of Central Europe. So this has been really interesting to look, for points of convergence in terms of approach to design, to avant-garde, to also to performance, post-war performance. I'm very excited about the possibility of extending relationships with some of the artists we met and hopefully institutions. This has been extremely informative for me, also because of my focus in painting, to visit Kiki Kogelnik Foundation and also Maria Lasnik Foundation. And from what I heard from Viennese people, these are places that are not easily accessible. So thank you so much for allowing that. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from the support that Vienna offers to artists and different ways of structuring financing of new productions and also post-COVID relief that, as I heard, was incredibly inspirational in this city in comparison to places like London or Poland and others. So,
just before we get to Michelle, given that you've both been visitors to Vienna over the years, were the last 3 days more of a confirmation for you of thoughts and impressions that you already have of Vienna, or were there surprises, were there things that jumped out that hadn't struck you on previous visits?
The tour that you offered was different than the tour I would have made myself, and therefore it offered me a different insight. Let's put it this way.
A little bit more historical, or the balance of historical and contemporary?
You've brought, the quality of this program has been that you offered your deep texture insight to, even when we had the dead faces of traveling by bus through the city, you were always there directing our gaze at some information. Yeah,
really, really annoying. Those damn microphones in the bus. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you really mean by that. Yeah.
It's not true. No, it is and actually I'm staying 2-3 days longer, and I'm going to miss that, because normally if you come, you go directed to some certain artists' ateliers, and then you're lost in space a bit, or you're dependent on somebody giving you
I'm free all day tomorrow.
As if your family. Yeah. No, so that was more than helpful and allowed also a different perspective.
Yes, and thank you also for offering the insight into the backbone of all these institutions that we've seen. I think it's one thing is to see the exhibitions, meet the curators, but also to understand the structure and the politics of all these places and how they complement the whole institutional makeup of the city. I think I found that very interesting, and also of inspiration in terms of my own job, how to organize as an institution, also as an institution that's very close to the local community, that tries to be of service to the local community of artists.
Michelle, this was your first time.
It was. It was fantastic. It was absolutely brilliant. You really did. I agree so much.
So we didn't organise this talk just to get thanks. Like, we're not that insecure, all right?
I did warn
you.
This is the
last thank you.
I did warn you beforehand. I was like, I only have really good things to say.
Good,
it has been wonderful. Yeah, I agree so much with what Natalia and Franziska said. You really brought the landscape alive for us, and that was huge. Yes, pointing things out on the bus, but really understanding the institutional makeup of the city, the kind of being able to take a litmus test everywhere we went and really sort of understand how institutions work, how they coexist with one another, to meet powerhouses like Valley Export, to go to places like Maria Lasnik Foundation, to Kiki Kogelnik, to really dive into folks. If we'd only been to those 3 places, my God, that would have been amazing. What wonderful women to take a look at. But yeah, to understand, I don't have the same point of comparison between Berlin and Vienna, but I came of age in Brooklyn when there was a similar scene, especially around music. And there's just something in the air when people are really excited about a place where there's lots of opportunity, unlike in the US where there's no state funding and there's a different funding model. It's so nice to hear of the fact that there are opportunities for philanthropic funding, for state funding, for different possibilities to come together to support in a way that just doesn't exist at home and is so... It makes me happy because it's a really, there are so many positive things about the arts in the US. It's a dire time in many ways though for it. And so I'm grateful for so many things, but being able to see this landscape, to understand it really deeply through your eyes and the expertise of the Phileas team was wonderful. And also, to be honest, there's very few times that we as curators get to have this experience. Usually we are providing it for somebody else. And so it was super inspiring. I will capitalize on so many of the connections that we made. If it's not something that I will necessarily work on, I know folks at home who would want to. It's been great, really a treasure.
I mean, one thing that struck me seeing Vienna through all of your eyes and Kathleen, and by the way, we didn't just choose the 3 happy ones. I don't think the other 6 are all like doing tequila shots at home. One thing that was really interesting to see Vienna and Austria through all of your eyes and the comments and the conversations we were having is that, as I think everyone here will agree, complaining is a kind of sport. In Vienna, in Austria, everything's shit, And what was really interesting was when I was in London last week, going to the Victoria and Albert Museum and finding 50% of the galleries closed. No staff.
Yeah.
No staff. English galleries closed. Indian galleries closed.
Yep.
You walk around the streets, every 3rd shop gone.
Yeah.
And we're here complaining about things could be better. It's a really good situation. Yeah. Yes, there's always improvements we could make, and we were talking about some of those things, some of the things Phileas is trying to do, the ministry are trying to do, the Stadt Wien is trying to do, but it's a really good basis, and it's a reminder to all of us, actually, when we spend time with people who come from other places with completely different, 3 completely different situations just here on the stage, what a kind of solid basis there actually is here. And I know that everyone here would probably put their hand up and say, well, actually, we could do this. Yes, but that's also a motivation in a sense as well.
I was going to say too, we haven't been able to have a gathering like this in our museum in the longest time. It was so nice to be able to go into institutions. I have one brilliant young artist closing a show next week and another really fantastic young artist opening a show a week and a half after that. And I asked if I can even gather our amazing contemporary patrons on the lawn outside so they could meet the artists. And it's hugely formative for these artists to meet collectors, to meet donors, to be able to have this. And collectors and donors want to meet young artists who are at the top of, they're emerging still, but their work is so strong. And we cannot do that. There's a blanket ban on any kind of meeting. And so it feels frustrating. You cannot do what you should be doing for contemporary artists or for folks who are collecting. So it's so nice to be able to do this.
Yeah. I was also struck by the lucidity and brilliant presentations that the artists gave in their studios. So we arrive at Lieselraff at 9:30 on a Sunday morning. Graveyard shift. And out comes this hour of absolute delight and intelligence and poise and brilliance and modesty and searching and then straight on to the next one and then on the next one. And it was a pleasure for me to realize how unbelievably equipped these young artists are to do this for a pretty intimidating group. At the end of the day, Lisa never had 9 international museum curators in her studio. I don't know if she's had more than 9 in total, and they're all there at 9:30 on a Sunday morning, and she just smashes it out of the park. So it was really nice to see how anyway. I'll stop bigging up Vienna, but it was really encouraging, put it that way.
If I may add, you also have a very vibrant gallery scene, and it changed recently. That's at least the impression that we get from the German perspective. And there's more and more attention on the programs of these galleries, and the younger generation being also integrated in these galleries, and curated by is a great format.
Yeah.
It gets so much attention and echo abroad. The fact that international curators, young curators, get to choose artists from these programs, it's a very good instrument to spread the word.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice to see that happening sort of the other way out as well, to see Vienna going out into the world often. I don't think the MFA, I don't think we have a work by Valley Export. I know that we don't yet have one by Maria Lasnig. We have spaces where we should be showing artists. And I mean, I looked at Sophie Thun's work and I'm like, it's just so good. So there are spaces in our collection, I think, for artists who we have seen this trip.
Yeah, that's great. We'll park Vienna for the moment. Maybe we'll start with Michelle. You're in the middle, in the immediate aftermath and ongoing aftermath, an extraordinary project, publication project.
Yes.
I mean, and much more beyond. Maybe
Yeah.
you'd like to tell people a little bit about what you've been up to in recent times.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So I work in the contemporary department at the MFA in Boston, and while I really like institutions, mostly because they pay my rent, I like doing a lot of projects outside of institutions because I don't often, to be really frank, I find it difficult sometimes to work within the politics of an institution for lots of reasons, but the US is a very plutocratic model, and I sometimes jar with that. About 6 years ago, in 2015, I was working at MoMA as a curatorial assistant in the architecture and design department. And I'd been there for about a year and a half. I venerated MoMA, I still do. It has a fantastic design collection for what I love to do. And I went to my amazing mentor, Paola Antonelli, and I said, Paola, I've got a really great idea for an acquisition. I think we should acquire the 1956 breast pump by Ina Egnell. And she said, okay, tell me more. And so if you've never seen the breast pump by Ina Egnell, don't put your breast anywhere near it. It looks like it will clip it off. But at the time, it was a really wonderful innovation. You can look it up online. It was a very human-centered design that made a breast pump portable. So instead of lactating people having to go to a big old airless room in a hospital, he actually went, Sharkara, to lactating people in the major hospital in Stockholm and asked them, what do you need from a breast pump, which really hadn't been updated in many, many decades. So I said it would be great to bring into MoMA's collection because it fit with this really seminal design exhibition that happened in 1934 called Machine Art. Machine Art was curated by Alfred Barr, who was just a couple years into his directorship as a very young director of MoMA, and Philip Johnson, who had an outsized impact on the history of modern architecture over about 60 years in that department and much further. So I made a pretty ironclad design history argument for it. It wasn't an outlier. It fit into this sort of machine art trajectory. It was a humble masterpiece of design, and that's something that MoMA did too. It was also a labor-saving device for women. It was something that you were meant to use so you could do 10 other things at the same time. And Paola said, an amazing design history, but there's absolutely no way that that's going to fly with the Architecture and Design Committee, Acquisitions Committee at MoMA, but you should do something with that. And I was like, great. Could you tell me every publisher that you know, because I'm going to send a book proposal out and I really want to make this something. To her extremely great credit, she said yes. So she gave me her Rolodex, and myself and my writing partner, Amber, sent out this book proposal called Designing Motherhood, Things That Make and Break Our Birth. And we rubbed our hands in glee because we had Paola Antonelli behind us who were like, people are going to notice this, it's going to be great. We sent book proposals out everywhere, no one got back in touch with us. And then when we sent them a follow-up email very politely saying, did you get our proposal? Hope it's looking good. They just emailed back and said, fascinating, but I'm not particularly interested in it, or who's the audience for it? And we pointed out that everyone has been born, so it should have a fairly wide audience. And they said, and this is 2017. So we just decided, Amber and myself, who's also a design historian, she's independent, let's just publish it ourselves. And then we started writing it, and about a year and a half later, we got these 3 emails in one day, and it was right around the time that the Harvey Weinstein case broke. And Me Too had happened, Time's Up had happened, and 3 publishers in literally the same week got back in touch with us, and they said, that book that you were talking about, where women sort of told their own stories through design, we think it could actually sell. And we were like, no shit, we think it could too. Thanks for being back in touch. And so by that point in time, I'd pitched MoMA, I'd pitched the Philadelphia Museum of Art where I was, I pitched the MFA, but then the pandemic happened. I pitched everyone I knew, which was an awful lot of people within the design world and further. we actually realized that we were not going to find a partner within the art world for this. And so I found an amazing organization called Maternity Care Coalition in Philadelphia. It was a 10-minute walk from the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So I went down one day, I knocked on the door, I'd never met anyone there. My British accent gets me far in these situations, and I very politely said, "You don't know me. I don't think an exhibition is going to be really helpful to you in many ways, but nobody knows what you do." And they're an amazing 40-year-old organization that have been working to impact maternal and infant health for so long. And so they work specifically with populations of color in the city. There's a racialized outcome in terms of birth outcomes across the world, but certainly in the US, where you were 7 or 8 times more likely to die as a birthing person or an infant if you were a person of color. And so they've been working to combat that through many strategies for a long time. So the very nice people that I met said, "Sounds interesting, okay, sign us up." And together we applied for a grant, and very long story short, the project that went from getting many, many no's went to a book that was printed by MIT Press and just came out a couple weeks ago, 2 exhibitions, a story banking project, lots of different things. And the first time I think that the New York Times has ever printed the term menstrual cup. We got like written up in Vogue and on Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop podcast the other week. So I think that's when we knew we'd made it. But yeah, the book sold out within the first week of it being in print. And I had to say, I sent it to my director. It's being recorded, I should be careful. I sent it to my director and I didn't yet get a response, but I said, you know, there are many issues within museums. There are many different constituents within museums that are often not catered to because they don't have the experiences of somebody who is paid the amount that you are or is at the senior level that you are. The humongous response that we've gotten to this project demonstrates that there is interest here, but because you've never lactated a day in your life, you're not particularly interested in breast pumps necessarily, but a ton of people are, and the many other things that happen through the arc of human reproduction, which include, you know, really serious issues like racialized outcomes in birth, baby loss, IVF, and the many design histories that are incredibly interesting behind these objects and systems. So yeah, I feel really proud of this project because it's a majority women of color led team. It's a book that has been really successful because it is team based. It's a culture that we've built from the outside, and we built it outside of museums. So there's a part of me that feels very conflicted about what I do because my day job, 9 till 9, is in a museum. The things that I think really change culture are often not within the institutions for which I work. But yeah, that's my project.
You're speaking to someone who just left the institutional world.
Yeah,
so,
I may join you.
Yeah. When you go home, open Google, Designing Motherhood, MIT Press. I warn you, if you do it after 10 o'clock at night, you're not getting to sleep until like 2 o'clock in the morning. It's a fascinating project, and order the book. And
you can also find it on Instagram if you want the free part of it. It's just Designing Motherhood on Instagram.
Yeah. Before we go to Natalia, just before you came to Vienna, you've been on a madcap cross-country America trip.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about
Sure,
what
and I'll make
about?
this one really short. I smell the nicest I've ever smelled in 4 weeks because for the last 4 weeks, I'll tell you, at the beginning of the pandemic, we couldn't pitch exhibitions, we couldn't pitch a lot of things. So I said to my advisor and my supervisor, who's amazing, really wonderful Swiss gentleman called Reto Turing, I said, I'd love to pitch going to learn about craft, which is what I look at the museum across the States. In a very small nutshell, craft is very white male dominated everywhere, but in the US certainly, and in the collection that I have. And I wanted to write an alternative history of craft by saying, by asking people, something that I ask on almost every studio visit, tell me about who your teacher was. There's the best stories when you ask somebody, how did you come to your practice? Who brought you here? Very often it's a very matrilineal history, someone's mom, someone's grandma. It can be lots of people, their family member, somebody they meet at church, something like that. And I thought, well, maybe I can write an alternative history of US craft today by asking people this one question. And if I go to all 48 contiguous states, then maybe I can learn a bit more about it across the country. And if I do it on the train, then nobody is subjected to my driving, and also it gives me sort of a parameter by which to go. And so I'm doing it in 5 different legs. It's called Craft Schools, where we make what we inherit. And for 4 weeks before I came here, I went across the top 11 states. So from the East Coast where I live, all the way through Illinois, Michigan, North Dakota, Montana, Washington, and Oregon, and then back again. So I slept in my sleeping bag on the train. Some of the trips were longer than 17 or 18 hours. And I have a total of $12,000 from the grant I applied for to get through all 48 states. So I slept in what Paula used to call deep coach. So
with the chickens.
With the chicken, yeah. I didn't shower for some days, and I did warn people in advance by email, I will be coming unshowered. I hope you can forgive me. And I just used a lot of wet wipes.
Another word that hasn't been mentioned in a Phileas conversation
There you
before.
go. Yeah. So that is the project.
And you've got another how many have you done?
I've done 11, so
Okay.
I've got another 37
7
states to go.
of the main
Yes.
bulk of America,
Yeah.
and maybe get out to Alaska and
Yeah.
Hawaii.
Yeah, and the goal is both a book at the end of it, but I will acquire work from each place that I go to, and so that will come back to the museum, and instead of being one exhibition, it will be in different places across our huge encyclopedic collection in the museum, so craft will live all across the museum in different ways, speaking to historic parts of the collection.
Amazing.
Thanks.
These are the types of people that we've had the pleasure of having lunches and dinners with for the last 3 days, and I'm feeling so crazily inadequate right now. But anyway, Natalia, we've been hearing little snippets. We actually, as is always the way on these things, there's always a couple of people that you don't have a long sustained. We've had little conversations all the last days. Everything you tell me is completely fascinating, but I can't join the dots yet between all the things you're doing. So what are you busy with at the moment?
Well, maybe I'll tell you a few words about our institution. As I mentioned, we are a relatively young museum, and the team is currently of 60 people, but the curatorial team really works like a collective. And I would say that we are very much run with a left-wing agenda in mind, and also like with the idea of a constituency museum, so trying to reach out to different constituencies. As we try to make use of our institution for the others. And as benevolent it sounds, I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I think this is like a crucial way of institutions recognizing the idea of public service. And for the last 15, how many years? 17 years, we've been without a fixed space. So pretty much we've been changing temporary spaces. Right now we actually have a space which is on loan from Franziska von Habsburg. It's a building designed by Adolf Krischenitz that traveled from Vienna to Berlin.
The temporary...
Yeah, the big container.
Temporary Kunsthalle.
Yes.
It's in Berlin, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
so now it's in Poland, and this is where we are at now, while we're waiting for the building to be erected in the middle of Warsaw, next to the Palace of Culture and Science, which is a Stalin's gift. If you've ever been to Warsaw or Moscow, it's one of the Seven Sisters. It's this extremely dominant symbol of Warsaw right in the middle of the city. So Thomas Pfeiffer and Partners, American architect who is designing the museum, has also tried to address how to redefine the concept of the public space and the main square in the city of Warsaw, the city that has very turbulent history, war history, communist history, post-communist history. It's like all these layers of memory and struggle. So we are already working on the opening show, which will consist of our collection. The space will open hopefully in 2023, so in 2 years. And until then, we are very busy with temporary exhibitions, which are usually group shows, kind of like problematic shows, or shows that they're not surveys, but rather like shows that try to ask questions and respond to them, not necessarily in a binary way of what's good and wrong, but rather try to like headbutt with some of the issues that we're all struggling with. My program, as I mentioned, deals predominantly with biopolitical issues and feminism. I worked on my first show at the museum was one of the first surveys on the impact of internet on affects and emotions and fragmented communication among artists who are by some considered a generation of post-internet artists, although I didn't use that term. And 2 years ago I opened a show dedicated to 50 women painters and women identifying painters who came from all sorts of places, and the key was to focus on a violence that is both inscribed in in the structural violence, but also like to look at womanhood not necessarily through victimhood, but through other aspects of our daily lives. And I included a painting by Kamila Bischoff there. I was really happy to see that painting, this very same painting that was in my show today at Belvedere 21. Yeah, I think...
By the way, sorry, if you haven't seen the Louisa's show upstairs at Belvedere 21.
It's incredible, yes. So good, so good. So I think for now, like I'm working on some exhibitions for the next year. I also just closed a solo presentation, new production by Polish filmmaker and video artist Agnieszka Polska. It was her first big production since the Neue Nationale Prize in Berlin. And but I would say like my everyday job is really like working with the microengineering of the institution and trying to figure out how to negotiate some of the meanings that are so conflicted in today's world, how to like negotiate this meaning with our public, how to negotiate the language, how to work with different activist groups, and respond to different needs of the community. So we have 2 trade unions at the museum.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Nice.
And I think it's also interesting to experiment with different models of governance for institutions. So this is why this trip has been so meaningful to me, also because of the meetings with artists who really address the question of labor, especially like feminine labor and what it means in our post-growth economy, which it might not necessarily be sustainable, and how we can really work on these hybrid models of collaboration, how to help artists predominantly. Between philanthropy, public funding, city funding, state funding.
I wanted to ask you that actually, 2 interconnected questions. How are you funded?
Yeah.
And how do you negotiate your relationship with those funders, if they are those funders?
Yes, this is quite tricky because you probably heard how the politics in Poland has been developing. We are funded by the Ministry of Culture, who fund our program, our acquisition budget, and the everyday budget for running the institutions, for our salaries. Yeah. The city, which is run by Liberal government, covers the rental and operation of the building. So it's a waltz. Being in Vienna also, it's a waltz, but it's. I also cannot complain. I mean, I know there has been a lot going on in Poland with many different institutions, and I think it's also, it has opened our eyes in many respects, because a museum like ours that has a clearly defined colonial, decolonial, post-emancipatory agenda, you know, has always had like this idea of being always right and telling the audience what's right to think, what's right to believe, what art you should see and how you should put these puzzles together. And I think right now many of us are in this state of crisis of finding the language to come together, like to coalesce, rather than disperse, especially that despite accelerated communication on the internet, I feel like our communication in everyday life and our relationships with the audience are just as much fragmented as the communication in different social media bubbles. So as you know, Facebook doesn't really work for communication with the audience. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Franziska, you wear a slightly different hat to everybody on the stage because you have responsibility for running an institution. So you were the most exhausted when you arrived. Yeah. But that has to do with your show. Actually, you were also...
No.
Yeah.
Franziska wins.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you just mentioned. You opened Thomas Feuerstein's show. What's on your desk? What are your opportunities over the next few years for the Kunstverein? What are the big challenges? What are the minor crises you're negotiating at the moment? What are the... Just exhausted you again, yeah.
No, it's yeah. You ask a lot of questions with a different repertoire of answers that I could possibly provide. But trying to give an overview is being a director of a Kunstverein may represent many different things. We have 300 Kunstvereins of all different sizes in Germany, from the one single room with an individual not being paid for doing to very major ones, and ours is one of the eldest. Provenance 1829, so it has a long tradition. And it's in this very city center, in between the dome and the city parliament. And we have this huge double building, which is a Gothic building reconstructed after World War II destruction, and a 50s year building. And we're right in the middle of, so to say, a very dense institutional landscape. We have the Schirnkunsthalle next door, we have the MMK, we have the Historical Museum, Porticos is around the corner. So it's been quite tricky when I started 7 years ago to rethink this Frankfurter Kunstverein with the necessity of giving it a profile that can hold against very large institutions, municipal funded institutions with a much larger team, and to still make a contemporary sense out of its original mission. And Kunstvereins have in their funding status, so to say, the idea that you have to be loyal to your local community and to your community of artists, especially the emerging ones. So trying to convey that into the 21st century, where everything has been so terribly globalized and everyone traveling left and right and relating to New York, Paris, and London, for me kind of like wasn't the answer if you wanted to have a responsible interpretation of what a Kunstverein meant to be without losing the broader perspective and the current topics, and without getting into the provincialism that is, also the other side of the possible scale. And therefore, I came in a moment where that institution was in a bit of an identity crisis, along with an economical crisis. So, yeah, it was challenging, because being a director, you are responsible for everything and nothing, so to say, at the same time, but basically everything. So, after 7 years, I have to say we're in the very fortunate situation where we have earned a recognizable profile for joining the most innovative, forward-looking positions in contemporary art production, with very interesting points in the scientific community, in which I'm a tourist, but I'm a very interested tourist. And I'm always trying to hunt for this new perspective upon our complex reality. So I worked along with my team methods of being as independent as possible from an economical point of view, because our funding basically the basis comes from the city of Frankfurt, and of course from our members, but I wanted to diversify enough not to have one institution to which I have to comply with. And therefore my team and I do a lot of applications in public and private funds, Stiftungen, which in Germany, compared to Italy, is a very fortunate situation. Having Italy as also another experience for a long time, I have to say that here again, a complaining country, Germany is a complaining country. We all complain, but we lose out of perspective that there's other countries and cultural settings that are much more difficult. And so we chose to broaden, and that.
Say we, how many are you?
The core team is 7 people, but I really, and this is part of the strategy that I thought that was relevant for our community, is to have an enlarged family system. It's not a team, it's kind of like an enlarged family, and that represented that we have mini employees that I recruit, that I recruit in art academias. And we employ them, we give them social security, and we carry them on for several years so that they really get a perspective also from what an institution is. Because my experience is that they come in with 20, 22, 23, 25, and they have the tendency, the young artists, to say, the institution, and they're very critical. But then when you ask, yeah, but what is define institution? And it starts to be clear that an institution is not a white cube with walls and, you know, and a door that opens to the public at 11 in the morning, but institution is made of people. And then in the end, if you cut it down, if you boil it down, is enabling people to join in and to collectively sort of shape an experience that to deliver to a larger community. So the question was, who is my audience? Because with the Kunsthalle, internationally known Kunsthalle, the MMK, Kittelmann first, Gensheimer then, now Susanne Pfeffer, it's very defined. So who is our audience? And we really made a lot of change management there, and we address now an audience that is interested in reading our contemporary reality, our social reality that is ever so complex and that has so many voices and perspectives and angles to read it from, but also from the perspective of artists that are informed by other disciplines. So I'm losing a bit the context l'art pour l'art, and I'm definitely moved out of the art market or gallery system, so to say, more and more, but not as a program, it just happened.
You mentioned this landscape of institutions, and it's something that we have in Vienna as well. There's great density of different types of institutions. How do all the institutions in Frankfurt, okay, two-part question, pre-COVID, how did all the institutions in Frankfurt communicate and collaborate with each other? And how might that have changed given circumstances of the last 18 months, if at all?
Depends what you want to hear. I mean...
Hard truth.
Yeah. The hard truth, hoping that nobody is connected online from my community, is, no, the hard truth is that actually we're in the fortunate situation that the colleagues on an institutional directors level in Frankfurt have a very collegial way of working together. Everyone is busy with sorting out their own institution and their own issues. But on the other hand, we all own the other's mobile phone numbers. And if there's an issue, we try to team up. And there's two things that I want to address with this. This is not an obvious situation. It might sound obvious, but it's not. Berlin, for example, it's exactly the contrary. Everyone fights everyone. And if there's a financial breach, you want to make sure that your colleague doesn't get it first. So this is not, fortunately, not the case in Frankfurt. And whoever comes in new is friendly, in a nice way informed, and this is the way we would like to keep it in Frankfurt. So this is great, and we have a lot of independent spaces in an independent cultural scene. Said that, because we have so many really good colleagues working in different, may it be ballet, may it be theater, may it be institution, or the free scenes, or the academia, Frankfurt has so much more potential that could be gathered from an overarching perspective that could be addressed by the cultural deputy, Kulturdezernat. Something similar must be here. And there we are lacking a lot of we're missing potential chances to instrumentalize what we're doing anyways and to deliver that message to the national or even international landscape through whatever medium, and we're discussing that. We're even offering our support, and this is not wanted, unfortunately. So I see that there's something that is changing in the cohesion in between us cultural operators and the politicians that should be responsible for cultural policy. For whatever reason, I wasn't suspecting that in Germany that much. I'm so used to it from Italy, but I wasn't suspecting that much that happening in Germany. Why this is happening, we're all trying to decipher, but it definitely is, and it is creating problems. It's also creating problems in terms of the financial support that we're getting. because there's now starting to, maybe I'm wrong, hopefully I'm not, that it doesn't get real, but my sense is that if you don't comply to a certain political direction and compliancy, you might be even burdened with punishment. And
financial punishment.
Yes, financial first of all, and or genehmigte Stellen, for example, that you don't get employee staff members agreed or whatever. So in this sense, we have the fortunate situation being association, an eingetragener Verein. We're a bit more free, and of course I use that freedom willingly, and this was also a reason why I accepted to be director in a Kunstverein, which was normally in terms of career not the obvious choice to make, but because we as a Verein, we have to first report to our members and not to politicians necessarily, which is not completely true, of course.
I mean, the system of Kunstvereins in Germany, I think I can safely say, is the envy of the entire world. I mean, the opportunities for artists to exhibit and the number of artists who can have their first stab at showing their work in an institutional setting is quite remarkable. We have a number of very active ones in Austria, but we could do with 10 times more, and you have all of them. I also think that Frankfurt, give it a few years, and my countrymen's decision to leave the European Union may end up benefiting Frankfurt. It'll certainly be one of the beneficiaries. I think. Let's see.
We expected it didn't happen.
Yeah, it's going to take some time. We're still sorting out filling up our cars with petrol and all that kind of stuff. But I think, yeah, it's a bit of a shit show over there. Yeah, give it a few more months, and I think people will be fleeing the ship. But let's hope so. I could go on talking for hours. I feel like you're all being very patient listening to us, and maybe we should open it up to, we've been talking for around an hour now, plus the 3.5 days on top of that. Maybe some of you would like to throw a question at our lovely guests.
Hi, I have a question. Of course, you come from 3 different setups in 3 different countries, but how in every of your setups do you feel certain, I mean, obviously in this direction maybe more than in yours, pressure from private people or from public from public governors on the programs that you want to do, on the direction, on the really sort of curating artistic direction that you want to take in your institutions? Is there some kind of unspoken, delicate, very strong level of trying to control a bit which artistic direction you want to take?
So I have to say that private sponsorship is extremely low in Poland. Like, there's not much philanthropy, which is probably because of the history and recent, the last 30 years of free market and democracy in the country, and lack of culture of philanthropy, which is very unfortunate. In terms of censorship from the state or the city, I'm in a very lucky position working with an incredible leader and director, Jana Metkowska, who I think like always encourages us to take risks. So this is like one of those models where you do stuff first and then you worry about the outcome, which I think it's like a great lesson to take from artists, you know, who are risk takers and who are trailblazers. And I think artists themselves are so underappreciated in public discourse beyond the art scene. You know, they have incredible analytical skills. Like, they can put the form to the content that is in the air, but we don't know yet how to name it, like what words to find it. So I think the problem for many institutions that could appear can actually come from a neoliberal model, which makes which puts like this incredible pressures on institutions to, to meet certain quotas with number of attendees and things like that, which after COVID, I think should be really rethought also in terms of the sustainability of artistic production. I think it should also work both ways. So I very much agree with Franziska, who mentioned that cultural policy has to be really done in the dialogue with institutions and with artists, because right now I think we have a very unequal distribution of care and support. So artists are those who take care of people in need. They go to demonstrate on the streets. The institutions try to take care of artists, and then like this pressure to feel. I know that we all need like certain statistics and numbers. I think there should be really a push, and I think all of us hoped after COVID that things would change a bit. So I'm just looking forward to working with my community, with galleries, with funders, with sponsors, with the city, and with artists and other colleagues to try to make this ecosystem slightly more sustainable, because right now, like in many places, it's a question of survival. So I think
I was reading a great article at the weekend in the newspaper about the role of art in a pandemic and artists, and it finished with the sentence, "Life has beaten down our souls, and we need artists to remind us that we have them." Or artists can remind us that they have them.
Like if you watched anything on Netflix or HBO or literally any kind of visual media online over the pandemic, then you benefited from it. Yeah, totally. In the US, it's a bit of a different situation. I mean, I tried to get that exhibition Designing Motherhood out for years, and I didn't need the state to tell me no. I just needed like 3 male directors and 1 male director of publishing. And so it really... Institutions in the US often shoot themselves in the foot, I think. We rely on funding that really comes from individual donors, and I have to say the donors that I've met at the museum are fantastic. We have a really committed set of contemporary collectors and donors there. We've contracted hugely, so the issue I have in presenting proposals for exhibitions right now is that we fired or furloughed a ton of our staff, and so I don't have enough conservators to work with, registrars to work with, colleagues to work with. Everybody is stretched thin already, and then the pandemic just has stretched everyone to the worst. And then add that on top of people who have care responsibilities. The schools haven't been open for a long time, and so it's a really dire situation in many ways, not just at my institution, but in many others. So I can't propose exhibitions right now because there's no one actually to get them over any of the lines that they need to. Yeah, exactly. In terms of funding, the ways I've got projects done, I've gone to get independent grants. So I raised around $450,000 to do Designing Motherhood, and that was a mixture of philanthropic funds, so Pew Fund, a Graham Foundation for the Arts Fund, and then amazing corporate funders like Loom and Stork and other kinds of maternity-related things. And then for the Craft Schools project, the Centre for Craft is very kindly funding it. So I guess when somebody tells me no, I'm like, okay, what's the way around the institution? And that often has to be the case, at least in larger institutions that I've worked for.
Going to get you 3 to come and give a fundraising seminar to everyone who works in an Austrian museum, and just yeah.
Well, from my perspective as a director, we have to always, I have to, from my position, to make sure that there's a diversification from the sources in order to keep, so to say, the balance. But then again, there is no such rule. I mean, I see colleagues from institutions with a collection that don't get enough public money to acquire, and therefore they enter, from my perspective, slippery ground with large galleries. Therefore, to promise monographic exhibitions against, percentage on acquisitions. So, which I understand from a pragmatic point of view, but I find it difficult. And here again, from the experience in Frankfurt, we have a ridiculously low budget for acquisitions for my colleagues. Doesn't concern us for the colleagues that have a collection there. And what is even worse here again is that other than few words, there is no will to assign new resources for acquisitions. And therefore the pressure of creating temporary exhibitions for each of the museums is higher and higher, because these are the cash cows. People don't come for the collections. And for example, the Städte Museum, which is our major museum, and they just opened a Rembrandt exhibition, and so this is the cash cow. Actually, Philip Demand, the director there, he last year he surprised everyone in the city by pulling out of the museum card that citizen or guests, tourists can buy in Frankfurt, which allows them to access nearly every museum. But he said, I have to pull out because the funding that I get from the communality is only making 17% of my yearly budget. But if everyone is able to acquire for 70 or 65 euros a museum card, I'm lacking that entrance at the cash that I have to then somehow...
So it wasn't a gesture, it was a genuine...
No, it was a necessity. And of course he got bashed. And actually, just recently, 2 weeks after his... because in Frankfurt, after Max Hollein did this triumvirate of the three institutions, because before it was separate, the Schirnkunsthalle got together with the Städel and the Liebig-Haus. And now, 2 weeks before the Philipp Demann had to be renewed on the Schirnkunsthalle, which is not a foundation, a Stiftung, but is a city-owned Kunsthalle, he got told off. So, what does that look like?
Soft power.
Soft. So these things are very worrying at the moment, because on the one hand side we have an understanding of cultural politics that goes out of the self-notion of I'm a temporary holder of something that I've been attributed by the public vote, but it goes into a hegemony of you better do what I decide that is the cultural policy. And I don't, and it's not a center-right conservative party that we have in the coalition and holding the cultural deputy at the moment. So these are tendencies, or the ministry, Grütter, that right before leaving her position as ministry in Berlin, she assigned Klaus Biesenbach, for example, without a committee of experts at all. So we have
which is insanity.
a
Which
new
let's just say very clearly
situation
is insanity.
of Roi Soleils putting
you're
in
welcome
power
to,
the
but,
cultural representatives of something that we think is a democratic system, at least to have an expert on the table of experts.
Or someone who doesn't have I'm sorry, I have a very strong feeling about that, having written Designing Motherhood, somebody who didn't have a pregnancy discrimination suit filed against him in the US, which I have to be very clear about. So I'm sorry he's in your city, but I'm glad he's not in mine.
We're acquainting
the
the same.
comment from the art critic of the New York Times when he heard that Klaus Biesenbach was going back from America to Berlin, he wrote a one-word tweet, tschüss. It kind of said everything, which was just the best five-letters tweet I've ever seen. It feels like we're reaching the stage of the evening where a glass of wine would be helpful for the continuation of this conversation.
I should probably say.
These research trips happen thanks to the Phileas partners who fund us extremely generously all year round, to the BM-Kurs. We have Theresia Niedermüller with us this evening, who have become very good partners with us over the last years for all sorts of things, Stadt Wien, and they happen because of the amazing Phileas team. Christina, who's put this evening's event on and does 1,000 other things for us. Salvatore, who's organized the whole research trip all week. Hannah over there. And Hannah over there, and Margarita lurking in the shadows. So thank you all very much. And two more thanks. There's a lot of people sitting in the audience that hosted us over the last few days and were just brilliant. So thank you very much for taking the time and hosting us. And last but not least, Kathleen and Franziska and Natalia and Michelle. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Go.
I just want to ask one little thing. Sort of you coming from abroad, as I did but ages ago, be it artistically, be it on the curator view, institutional view, how would you define Viennese or Austrian specificity, if there is one for you?
When the program that we just saw, this 3 days, amazing women artists.
Okay.
Like really, like the 3 artists that I named, Kiki, Valley, and Maria, like, wow.
And Sophie Thun.
And Sophie Thun, yeah, and Sophie, and then Liesel, yeah, amazing women, like everybody, and curators and archivists and just amazing women, which is so wonderful to see. And I know that's one very specific strand, but it made me really happy because I live in a world where there's a thin crust of men at the top of it, and they're lovely a lot of the time, but things really have to change, and I was really happy to see this incredible powerhouse of women, as you're right, Jasper, at every single stage of the arc of artistic practice. It gave me huge hope.
And lots of the gallerists we met.
So thanks, Salvatore.
Yeah.
Because that was yours.
And also, we were talking about Maria Lasnik leaving Austria to go to New York because it was the city of strong women. But then she came back, and what she's left behind is a city of strong women. So there's a nice sort of little thing there. How would you crystallize?
I'm not very good at synthesizing, so I apologize for that. But I think, having seen that show at Belvedere 21 today, like it really made me think of some of the issues that we're struggling with today and how much we can look back in the past to actually understand where we are now. So I think resistance, and there's one word that came up quite a few times when we talk to artists or to curators, guilt, especially guilt related to women. So we can understand it like in terms of post-war guilt or like different type of traumas, and just basically like reworking through those different affects, the structure of our private life and public life. So many things. I guess we also talked about design, the approach to handcraft design, painting, sculpture that has a little bit of roughness to it, that has this like a little bit uneven around the edges, that is so much informed by body politics. I think that's ultimately what it might be. So I cannot provide you a clear answer. I hope we can elaborate over wine, but there are so many things to discover. That's another thing. I'll tell you one anecdote. Like recently I was doing research at the Museum of Photography in Krakow in Poland, and I discovered these photographs from the 20s, really amazing photographs of performers and dancers. And there was signature T. Fleischmann, and the archivist ascribed it to male and a studio in Berlin. I said, come on, this is true, the Fleischmann. And there was like this incredible discovery of, this visionary photographer who established free space for women as a performance space in terms of photography, in terms of being a muse and a photographer, and how much we have to learn about this canon also outside of Vienna. So I really hope that it's actually something that I might work on in the future as well, how to contextualize it with the contemporary practice, because I feel like there's so many contemporary artists are also looking back to Viennese past of the interwar era, and that's very inspiring and interesting.
Yeah. We'll make sure we get the catalogue of the Belvedere 21 show for you.
Great.
Thanks. Coming from a more recent art world, I think you have many artists, men, female, no matter which ones, which with a bit more of support. I think they're doing fine already with getting out, but with a bit more of support, economically speaking, not even, maybe that's something that we can also incentivize from a private sector. With a bit more of support, they can be visible also as Austrian artists, and not only as artists going around the world like they would. And I'm a bit familiar also with Innsbruck and with other cities, and really it is amazing how many Austrian-related successful and interesting artists you have, and that sometimes we get to know them because they have a grant in Amsterdam or because they went living somewhere abroad. It's a card that you could play even more.
Yeah. That was the focaccia alarm. Focaccias will now be served with wine, with beer. I knew these two were going to ask the questions. Let's get these two a glass of wine to begin with. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you. It is why I told you to sit there, because I knew I'd get intelligent questions. Oh, that was great.
Sounds fantastic. I will send you the book. Please do.